When you shoot a shot, you can sometimes get geometric distortion around the edge of the lens, and you can also get some light changes as well due to the light falling off around the edge of the lens and vignetting or darkening the corners of the frame. Here's a before version and here's an after version. There's a subtle difference there. It's a little bit lighter here now because the lens distortion has been corrected, the vignetting has been lightened up, and also the before version slightly curving up towards the edges of the frame, but we've sorted that out by counteracting the distortion using the lens correction filter. Now there's lots of sliders there to make corrections manually, but the cool thing is with CS5 you can create a profile for your own lens and camera setup and then correct the distortions precisely and automatically. I'll show you how to do that now. To create a personal profile for your lens, you can download the Lens Profile Creator. Just type here to do a search or go to labs.adobe.com and you'll find the link very easily, and you can then go and tick here to agree that you've read the terms and conditions and then download it for the Macintosh or for Windows just by clicking here, and then it will download onto your computer as a zip file which you'll need to unzip to access. Once the file has downloaded, you'll need to click open to unzip the contents. So just click like that and wait for a few seconds, and you'll see a folder called Adobe Lens Profile Creator 1.0. Double click to go in there, and there's a variety of useful folders inside. Now you'll notice that there's the Adobe Lens Profile Creator sitting there, but the first thing we need to do is to print out a sheet to allow us to calibrate our camera lens, and you'll find the calibration charts in this folder here. I'm just going to change to Details View, and I'm just going to open things up a little bit so we can see things more easily. And we can see the name as well by dragging this to the right to make more space. So there's lots of different types of charts. Which ones shall we choose? These charts come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but Adobe recommend if you're shooting a profile for the first time, then landscape letter 8.5 by 11 inches with a square print dimension of 54 points and 9 by 13 rows should do the trick. That will fit on an A4 printer. But if you've got a printer that will print larger like A3, then that is actually better to have a larger calibration sheet. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at another calibration chart. But if you can print up to A3, then go to Landscape Tabloid, 11 by 17 inches, a square print dimension of 54 points again, but this time we've got 11 rows and 21 columns. So let's double click to open up this chart. Click open and you'll see a very typical calibration chart. There you've got your checkerboard pattern, and that's used to measure any distortion in the lens, and you also get to see chromatic aberration as well by seeing the contrast between these white and black squares. We're going to print and shoot this to discover any distortion that we get with the lens. We'll also spot fall off of light around the edges so we can see vignetting on the lens, and then when we create a profile using the test shots that we take with this sheet, we can then counteract any of the distortion and vignetting and chromatic aberration that is caused by our lens. Once you've printed your calibration chart, pop it on a wall and make sure it's nice and flat and straight, and use a uniform, even light source. You can use daylight if you like for this, as long as it's constant. Use live view mode to help you with the composition, and then if you set the camera to manual, you can use an f-stop of f11 for a nice constant depth of field, and then adjust the shutter speed using a histogram to guide you to help you get a healthy exposure. Then frame the shot so that the calibration chart is in the middle, it's filling about a quarter of the frame, and take your first picture. Once you've taken your first shot, tilt the camera down to position the calibration chart at the top middle center of the frame. Take a shot and then tilt the camera up until the calibration chart is in the bottom central grid, and then you can take another shot, but make sure that the edge of the calibration chart is just touching the edge of the frame so you can map every little bit of your lens's edge. So once you've mapped the center of the lens, then pan the camera to the right and take a shot of the calibration chart in the bottom left section of the frame. Tilt down to shoot the left middle square, and then tilt down again to shoot the left top square, like so. And finally pan the camera to get an image on the bottom right, and then the right middle, and another one on the right top, and you'll now have 9 images that map the entire range of your lens. So once you've taken your 9 shots, you need to import them into your computer. Now, to keep the quality to a maximum, we shot in Camera Raw format. You could use high quality JPEGs, but we use Camera Raw. But for the Lens Profile Creator to read Camera Raw, we need to convert these files, first of all, into digital negative format. You can download the Adobe DNG converter for free from adobe.com, and then just double click on that, and whether you're shooting in Nikon RAW or Canon RAW, you can convert the files to DNG quite easily. Just choose Select Folder, browse to the folder where the files are created. In this case, for me, I've got them in a folder called Raw Charts. Click Select, and then just click and save them with the same document name, but click convert and it will then run through them all and it will process them and turn them from CR2s, which is the Canon RAW format, to DNG, which is a much more universal and easily recognized version. It takes a little while to do. As you can see, it's processing, and then you can see the DNG versions are appearing here as a separate icon. So I'll jump forward in time until these have been converted. So a few minutes later, we've converted all of our RAW files into digital negative format. So we can click OK to agree with that, and then we can click Exit because we now have the files we need. If you don't have time to print out a chart and take photographs of it and import them into the computer, then pop along to our CD because we've popped 9 photographs of a chart onto the disk, and what you can do is import those into Lens Profile Creator, create a profile, bring that into Photoshop, and then apply it to a photograph that was captured using the same camera as the one we used to capture these shots of the chart. And you'll see how that profile works perfectly with the lens and the camera setup that we used. Once you've got your 9 images, you can then pop back to the Adobe Lens Profile Creator folder that you downloaded, double click on the icon of the software itself, and just click Extract All to make sure it's going to run properly. Click Next, and then just follow the instructions in the wizard, and it will then open up the software and make it usable. It's just extracting it now. Click Finish to see the extracted files. There we go. That's the Adobe Lens Profile Creator. Go into here and you should now be able to run the software as normal, and you can see the icon has changed to something a little bit more useful. Okay, we're ready to double click to launch the Lens Profile Creator. Click Run and up pops this new window. So you're now ready to import the photographs you've taken yourself of the chart on your wall, or alternatively you can use the ones we took which are on the disk. So I'm just going to import those ones now, and you can see them by going to File, Add Images to Project, then browse to the disk. In my case, they're on my desktop, so I'm going to go to the folder there, and you can see the labels here, the lens profile and the focal length we used, the f-stop, and so on. So if I shift click to select those, click Open, it will import them into the Adobe Lens Profile Creator. We've got a focus distance group because we shot them all at 32mm, but you could also take other focal lengths as well and create other focus distance groups, and that would allow you to create a more thorough looking lens profile. You can see metadata like our Canon EOS 5D Mark II, the lens we used, and other details like the resolution and the bits and so on. And down here, as well as having the lens name, the camera name, and so on, we've got the lens calibration option. And most lenses will be rectilinear unless you're using a fisheye lens, but because we're using a zoom lens, then this is the button to tick. You've also got the option to turn off profiles for vignetting and chromatic aberration, but since the lens correction filter in Photoshop covers both of these two things, it's worth ticking them as well. So you're creating a profile for these, as well as the standard geometric distortion at the edge of the frame. And at the bottom of every chart, you'll notice there's a rows and columns detail, and you've also got square print dimensions as well. So those details need to be imported into checkerboard info, so you can type in the amount of rows, the amount of columns, and the print dimension in points. The final thing we need to do is add a screen dimension, and that means we've got to zoom in to the shot, find an image with as small a square as you can, so you might need to scroll around a little bit just to have a look, and you're trying to find things that have got a really tiny edge to them. So what we're going to do is zoom in on this one here, and let's have a little gander. We need to find one of the smaller squares. This one looks quite good, and what I'm going to do is grab the measure tool here, click down here to zoom in a little bit more, maybe to even 100%, and that gives you a nice easy to measure square. Click and drag to draw one of the sides of the square, and this will give you the screen dimension information you need. You've got 105 there, so what we're going to do is click yes to apply that to the screen dimension pixels option down here. And now what we're going to do is click generate profiles, and it's going to actually look at all of these checkerboards and all of the images, and it's got all the information about the images it needs to work out how the lens is distorting photographs at the edges, what sort of drop off in light we've got with vignetting, how much chromatic aberration we've got, and we'll end up with a lens profile we can then use in the lens correction filter in Photoshop. So just click here, sit back and wait while the calculations begin, and it's going to work through the images one by one in this focus distance group to create our profile. So it might take a while as it's working through. You might even pop up and have a cup of tea, relax, and then come back and see how it gets on. It'll take a few minutes to work on each image, and then it'll select the next image. If there's any problems with the image, the way it's set up with the lighting, then you'll see a little icon appear with a little exclamation mark. But you don't need all of these to work to create a lens profile. You can get away with a failure rate of a couple of them, and then you will end up with something that's still usable, but obviously it's nice not to see any warning icons. So I'm just going to pause and jump forward in time to see how the final profile looks. I've jumped forward in time and it's finished looking at all of these shots. There's no warnings there, so the shots were taken well, and it's found a model for the vignetting and the distortion, and we've now got a profile which is labelled after the camera make and model and the lens and so forth. But you could call that anything by typing a new profile name in here if you wanted to have something that was easier to read. But it makes sense to use the camera details because you can then share the profile with other people and they know exactly which setup it's for. Here's one we prepared earlier, but this is the one we're going to actually use on the photograph we're going to edit in Photoshop, because that was taken with the same camera that shot our calibration charts. So let's click Save to save the profile as a profile file which is called LCP, Lens Camera Profile. Click Save and off we go. So let's pop into Photoshop and open up the file and apply the profile to it. It's called lenscalbefore.dng. That's our source image, a nice scenic shot here. It's a DNG, so it opens in the raw editor. Let's click Open Image to access the handy lens correction filter in the standard Photoshop editor. Okay, and you'll find that by going to Filter and choosing Lens Correction. Now the cool thing is, when you open up your photograph in the lens correction filter, the profile we created earlier is automatically applied by appearing in the lens profile window here. And you can see these are automatically ticked, so it's correcting geometric distortion, aberration and vignetting. You can then turn them on and off to see the before and after, just to see how the profile is affecting your photo. For example, with vignette, we turn that off and you can see there's a drop off of light around the edges of the frame like we'd expect, so we can counteract that by turning it on. Aberration's a bit harder to spot unless there's any really high contrasty areas, but geometric distortion will be noticeable. If we turn that off, there's a little bit of a curve towards the edges of the frame, and that's counteracted when we turn it on, because all those checkerboards we shot using the camera earlier on are now being mapped and applied to help us counteract any distortion around the edge of the frame. So we've got our own profile there, and we can apply that to all the photographs using the same lens and camera setup. So you can use this particular profile at any time. Alternatively, if you haven't got the time to set up a lens profile, you could try searching online just by clicking here, and then it will search through all of the camera and lens combinations that suit the metadata that's in your photograph, so it can tell what camera you're using. And you can see there's lots of other Canon EOS 5D Mark II profiles using the same lens, so you could try clicking on these to see if they make a better change than the profile that you created yourself. So that's a great and quick way of finding other lens profiles with a minimum of effort.